Skull Island, the Darkhold Experiment, Prologue. In the 28th century, Earth is dying. The skies burn with acid rain, the oceans churn with toxic waste, and humanity clings to the last vestiges of civilization. But beneath the surface, deep within, the ancient corridors of hollow Earth, something stirs. For centuries, Skull Island was thought to be a myth, lost in the mists of time, hidden behind an impenetrable cloaking field. Until now, a storm unlike any in recorded history rips through the Pacific, tearing apart the veil that has kept Skull Island shrouded in secrecy. Satellite feeds go dark. A tremor shakes the foundations of the world, and then the first transmission. They're alive. They've escaped. The experiments. Silence. The world government scrambles for answers. Classified reports speak of a mad scientist order known as the Alchemic Codex, rogue geneticists who vanished decades ago, rumored to have stolen the Darkhold, an ancient tome of forbidden knowledge. Using the teachings of arcane alchemy fused with cybernetic engineering, they sought to create something beyond human, something monstrous. Mission: Operation Oblivion. A team is assembled. Leading the expedition, Dr. Alexis Vaughn, biologist, and expert in hybrid evolution, flanked by Dr. Kane, a cybernetics engineer with a history of Black Ops research, accompanied by a force unlike any before them, the Spartan Unit, the most advanced warriors humanity has ever produced. Their objective: investigate, secure, eliminate if necessary. But nothing can prepare them for what awaits beneath the jungle canopy. For what was once an island of beasts is now a forge of nightmares. The Darkhold's curse. Skull Island is no longer just a home to titans of the past. It is an evolving nightmare, a laboratory of flesh and machine where prehistoric monstrosities have been reborn in metal and sorcery. And they are no longer caged. The storm was not an accident. It was a warning. A call to the abominations. Still lurking in the depths, the Darkhold's knowledge has taken root, twisting the very fabric of life itself. As the team descends onto the island, their dropships trembling against the winds, the jungle watches them. Something is moving in the shadows faster than any creature should. Then the first scream. The mission has begun, but survival is not guaranteed. Chapter 1. The veil lifts. The air in the dropship crackled with tension as the team of specialists geared up for what could very well be their final mission. Dr. Alexis Vaughn stood by the front viewport, her gaze fixed on the dark horizon ahead. Beyond the thick, ominous clouds that roiled above, Skull Island loomed like a phantom, shrouded in mystery and fear. "It's real," she whispered under her breath, unable to fully comprehend the scale of what they were about to face. She had studied the biological anomalies that once called Skull Island home. Dinosaurs, ancient reptiles, and strange life forms that defied the natural order. But she never imagined it would come to this. Behind her, Dr. Kane was already configuring the cybernetic enhancements in his Black Ops suit, his mind far from the reality of the mission. He had never been one for sentimentality. The data was clear. Skull Island was an ecological nightmare, a place where the rules of nature no longer applied. But what bothered him most was the disappearance of the Alchemic Codex. It had been locked away for a reason, and now it had returned. The Spartan Unit, 12 of the most advanced genetically and cybernetically enhanced soldiers in existence, were preparing their weapons, checking their gear with clinical precision. Each of them was a living weapon, bred and built for combat. But this mission would test them in ways they had never imagined. Approaching Skull Island in T-5 minutes, the pilot's voice crackled through the comms, snapping everyone to attention. The dropship began its descent, shaking with the force of the wind, the storm seemingly intensifying as they neared their destination. The sky above was a sickly, pulsating green, and flashes of lightning illuminated the treacherous landscape below. The jungle stretched out in all directions, thick and suffocating, as though the island itself was a living, breathing entity. As they broke through the storm, the island revealed itself in all its terrifying glory. The once lush forests had turned into twisted groves of mutated flora, giant pulsating vines, towering mushrooms, and trees that seemed to move, their bark contorting like muscle. This isn't what I expected," Dr. Vaughn muttered, stepping away from the window. Her voice was barely audible over the roar of the wind, but the others heard her, and the tension in the dropship deepened. The pilot's voice came through again, but it was laced with a strange urgency. "We've lost comms with command. Something's interfering with our signal." "We're on our own then," Dr. Vaughn said with a steadying breath. "Keep your heads on straight, people. This isn't just an island, it's a war zone." The Spartan unit leader, Sergeant Thorpe, nodded grimly. "We'll move in, secure the perimeter, and find out what we're dealing with. Stay sharp." The dropship shook violently as it descended into the dense jungle below. Trees bent and snapped in the winds, as though something unseen was trying to stop their arrival. As the ship touched down with a jarring thud, the hatch doors opened, and the team disembarked. Into the suffocating humidity of Skull Island. The air was thick with the smell of decay, and the ground was slick with the remnants of the storm. The jungle seemed alive, the sounds of unseen creatures echoing from the shadows, too distant and too strange to pinpoint. But there was something else, a subtle vibration in the air, an energy that made the hairs on the back of their necks stand on end. "Stay together," Sergeant Thorpe commanded, his voice low but firm. "Move out." The team advanced, their boots sinking into the muddy earth, weapons at the ready. As they moved deeper into the jungle, the trees and foliage seemed to close in around them, as if the island itself was trying to swallow them whole. Suddenly, a rustling in the underbrush sent everyone into immediate alert. The Spartan unit raised their rifles, scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. But nothing emerged. Silence. "Did you hear that?" Dr. Vaughn whispered. Before anyone could respond, a blood-curdling scream shattered the stillness. It was a sound that didn't belong on Earth, a sound of agony, of something unnatural in its pain. Dr. Vaughn's heart raced. "That's not just any animal, it's human." A second scream followed, this one higher-pitched, almost desperate. Then, in the distance, the unmistakable sound of heavy footsteps, too heavy for any man or beast they had encountered before. "Move out now!" Sergeant Thorpe barked. The team sprinted forward, following the direction of the screams. As they neared a clearing, the first thing they saw was the wreckage of a transport vehicle, its sides crushed and its cargo scattered. The faintest trace of something metallic glinted in the undergrowth, but it wasn't the wreckage that grabbed their attention. A thing was crawling on the ground, his body contorted in unnatural angles. His flesh was partially torn away, revealing exposed cybernetic components beneath. But it wasn't just his body that was altered. His face was a twisted mockery of humanity, his eyes glowing with a sickly green light. Dr. Vaughn gasped. "What the hell is that?" Before anyone could react, the creature let out another inhuman screech, its head snapping toward them, its mouth filled with sharp metal teeth. It lunged. "Open fire!" Sergeant Thorpe ordered. The sound of gunfire erupted into the air, but the creature was fast, faster than anything they had ever seen. It dodged and weaved through the barrage of bullets, its body seemingly made of both flesh and machine, fluid and unpredictable. It was no longer just an island of monsters. It was a factory of nightmares. Chapter 2. The Blood of Titans. The air was thick with the scent of decay as Dr. Vaughn and the Spartan unit pushed deeper into the jungle. The twisted trees above them seemed to groan in the wind, their bark pulsing as if they were alive. Every step they took seemed to echo with the weight of 1,000 unseen eyes watching them from the shadows. The creature they had encountered earlier, a horrific fusion of man and machine, had been dealt with swiftly, but its eerie screech still rang in their ears. It was clear now that they weren't just up against the remnants of prehistoric beasts. The island had become something far worse, a battleground for forces they could barely comprehend. Keep moving, Sergeant Thorpe ordered, his voice firm, but laced with the tension of their situation. This is only the beginning. Dr. Vaughn's mind raced. The creature they had just encountered wasn't an isolated incident. It was proof that whatever twisted experimentation had occurred on Skull Island was far more advanced than she had ever imagined. The cybernetic enhancements, the hybridization with primitive biological traits, it was all pointing to something far more dangerous than a rogue group of scientists, something alive. The storm had calmed, but the jungle seemed to grow denser with each passing minute. Their surroundings felt like they were closing in on them, and the unsettling feeling that something was watching them only grew stronger. "Dr. Vaughn," Dr. Kane Ido called from behind her, his voice tinged with concern. "I've been analyzing the creature's cybernetics. There's a high probability it wasn't just an accident or a failed experiment. It was intentional. It's as though it was designed with this specific environment in mind." "I was afraid you'd say that," she replied, her voice steady despite the dread creeping up her spine. The alchemic codex was supposed to be lost, but now, it's clear, it's still influencing this island. And the creatures we're facing, they're evolving at an exponential rate. The dense jungle gave way to a clearing ahead, bathed in a sickly green light. It was unlike anything they had encountered so far, an eerie, unnatural place that seemed to hum with energy. The ground was cracked, as though some massive force had recently erupted from beneath. In the center of the clearing stood a massive stone structure, weathered by time but unmistakably artificial. Ancient, yet not of this world. Dr. Vaughn's heart skipped a beat. This wasn't here before. This is the Darkhold, Sergeant Thorpe finished, his eyes narrowing as he surveyed the structure. "It's what we came here for. The Darkhold, the forbidden tome of alchemical knowledge, rumored to hold the keys to life, death, and the creation of abominations." The storm had been the harbinger of its awakening. And now, standing before them, it was clear that the island was no longer just a remote location. It had become a sanctuary for something far darker. A low, guttural growl interrupted her thoughts, pulling her back to the present. Her eyes shot toward the edge of the clearing, where shadows seemed to move with an unnatural fluidity. Something was out there, something that wasn't human, wasn't even animal. "Stay sharp," Thorpe muttered as he motioned for the team to spread out, weapons at the ready. The Spartan unit moved in formation, scanning the area for any signs of movement. The air itself seemed to pulse with malevolent energy. Then from the darkness it emerged. A massive creature, easily 15 feet tall, its body a grotesque fusion of muscle, bone, and metallic plating. Its face was a twisted mockery of a man's, but its eyes glowed with an unnatural, acidic yellow. The thing's body was scarred and disfigured, its metal limbs jerking unnaturally as it moved, as though the mechanical parts weren't quite integrated into its biological form. It had once been human, or something close to it, but now it was something far worse. "Another one of them," Dr. Vaughn breathed, stepping back instinctively. She could feel the weight of its gaze, and every fiber of her being screamed for her to run, but she knew she couldn't. "Not now. Engage," Thorpe commanded, his voice cold and professional. The Spartan unit opened fire, their weapons unleashing a barrage of rounds that tore into the creature. But the creature barely flinched, its body a grotesque amalgamation of organic and mechanical defenses. It was fast, far faster than they had anticipated, ducking and weaving through the gunfire. With terrifying agility, its metallic limbs clicked as it advanced on them, a low, inhuman growl rumbling from deep within its chest. "Something's wrong," Dr. Vaughn murmured, watching the creature with mounting concern. "It's not responding like an animal or a machine. It's thinking, adapting." Before anyone could respond, the creature let out a shriek, a sound so high-pitched, it sent shockwaves through the air, causing the very ground beneath their feet to tremble. The air was filled with a sudden, acrid scent, an unmistakable warning. "EMP pulse," Dr. Vaughn shouted, realizing the creature's next move. It's going to release an electromagnetic pulse to disable our tech. The warning came too late. Creature unleashed the pulse, and in an instant every piece of electronic equipment in the clearing, comms, weapons, even the Spartan unit's enhanced suits, shut down in a blinding flash of static. The jungle fell into silence. "Shit," Sergeant Thorpe muttered, his voice tinged with frustration as he tried to activate his weapon. It was useless. They were vulnerable. Dr. Vaughn's mind raced. She knew that in this moment, the team needed more than just firepower. They needed strategy. She needed to out-evolve the island's horrors. "Back to basics," Dr. Vaughn muttered, her voice steely with determination. "We can't fight them with brute force. We need to understand them, adapt, like they have." "How do you suggest we do that?" Kane asked, his voice sharp with disbelief. "Doctor." Vaughn turned to face him, her eyes hard with resolve. "By turning the island's experiments back on itself." As the creature charged forward, claws extended, she sprinted toward the stone structure, the source of the Darkhold's dark influence. If she could gain access to the hidden knowledge within, perhaps she could find a way to reverse the process, or at the very least, control the creatures in some way. The team followed her lead as the hybrid monstrosity bore down on them, its metallic limbs snapping like iron, its scream filling the air. The jungle trembled once more, but Dr. Vaughn was no longer afraid. She had a plan, and this island was about to learn that even monsters could be out-evolved. Chapter 3. The Forge of Nightmares. The massive stone structure loomed ahead, its jagged edges standing like a dark monolith in the heart of Skull Island's corrupted jungle. The air around it hummed with unnatural energy, an eerie resonance that seemed to warp the very fabric of reality. It was as if the island itself was alive, pulsing with an intelligence of its own, a primal force that had been awakened by the power of the Darkhold. Dr. Alexis Vaughn felt the weight of the island pressing down on her as she neared the structure. The creature, a grotesque hybrid of man and machine, was closing in, its yellow eyes burning with malice as it shrieked into the jungle. The Spartan unit was close behind her, their movements hurried but purposeful, despite their disoriented state from the EMP pulse. "Form a perimeter," Sergeant Thorpe barked. His voice was low but filled with urgency. "We're not letting that thing get any closer." Dr. Vaughn barely heard him. Her focus was entirely on the stone structure ahead. She had to get inside. It was their only chance. As she reached the entrance, she placed her hand on the surface of the stone, feeling the pulsing energy beneath her fingertips. The air around her crackled with tension, as though the very atmosphere was alive, aware of their presence. "What the hell is this thing made of?" Kane asked, his voice tight with frustration. "I've never seen anything like it." Dr. Vaughn didn't respond immediately. Her eyes were focused on a strange symbol etched into the stone's surface, a series of interlocking geometric shapes that seemed to shift and shimmer as she stared at them. "I think this is part of the Codex," she said, her voice filled with awe and fear. "The symbol, it's an alchemical pattern, the Darkhold's teachings." Without another word, she pressed her hand against the symbol, channeling all her knowledge of hybrid evolution and ancient alchemy. A pulse of energy shot through her, and the stone seemed to ripple like water. The entrance began to open, revealing a dark passage beyond. But before they could enter, the creature reached the clearing. With a deafening roar, it charged, its mechanical limbs grinding as it moved, its claws extended and ready to tear through flesh. "Stay inside," Dr. Vaughn shouted, pushing past the doorway as the rest of the team followed her in. The massive doors slammed shut behind them with a thunderous crash, sealing them inside. For a moment, everything was silent. Then the ground beneath them trembled, the walls pulsing with energy. The dark corridor they found themselves in stretched into the depths of the structure, illuminated only by faint, eerie lights embedded in the walls. The air was thick with the scent of metal and decay. "We can't stay here long," Sergeant Thorpe said, his voice strained as he checked his gear. "That thing is still out there, and we have no idea what's waiting for us inside." "I know, Doctor," Vaughn replied, her voice steady but filled with urgency. "But we don't have a choice. If we're going to survive this, we need to understand the Codex and what's going on here. This place is the key." They moved forward through the corridor, the eerie glow from the walls casting long shadows. The deeper they went, the more the air seemed to grow thicker, as though the very atmosphere was charged with a malevolent force. It wasn't just the Darkhold they had to worry about. It was everything the island had become. Dr. Vaughn paused as they reached a large chamber. In the center of the room was a massive altar, its surface covered in strange runes and symbols. Above it, a glowing orb floated, surrounded by an intricate web of mechanical tendrils that extended into the walls. "This is it?" she whispered, her voice filled with awe. "The Darkhold's source, this is what powers everything on the island." Sergeant Thorpe stepped forward cautiously. "What the hell is this thing?" "I don't know," Dr. Vaughn admitted, her brow furrowing. "But it's connected to everything, the mutations, the hybrid creatures, the storms. I think it's feeding off the island's ecosystem, warping it. This orb, it's some kind of conduit, a way to channel the Codex's alchemical power." She turned to Kane Ito, her eyes alight with a sudden realization. "Kane, can you access the orb? Find a way to interface with it? I think it's the key to stopping all of this." Kane hesitated, clearly uncertain. "You want me to connect to that thing? It looks like it's not just powered by tech. That's pure, unadulterated alchemy at work." "I know," Dr. Vaughn replied, her voice resolute. "But it's the only chance we have. We need to understand it before the island's horrors evolve any further." Kane exhaled, clearly nervous but willing to follow through. He stepped forward, his hands moving to his cybernetic interface as he approached the orb. As he connected his systems, the orb responded with a low hum, its light flickering. The mechanical tendrils that surrounded it seemed to animate, twisting and shifting as though alive. Suddenly, a voice boomed through the chamber, low, guttural, and filled with an ancient malice. "You dare disturb the Forge of Nightmares?" The ground trembled as a dark shadow rose from the depths of the chamber. From the far corners of the room, towering figures began to emerge, hulking, twisted creatures, their forms a nightmarish blend of flesh and machine. They were the guardians of the Darkhold, remnants of the ancient experiments, and they were ready to defend their creator. Kane. Ito stumbled back, his connection to the orb severed. "We've triggered something. Get back," before anyone could react. The first of the guardians lunged, its massive fists crashing into the stone floor. It was a creature of pure muscle, its body armored in jagged metal plates, its eyes burning with an unnatural yellow glow. "Move! Move! Move!" Sergeant Thorpe yelled, signaling for the team to retreat. The Spartan unit opened fire, but the bullets bounced harmlessly off the creature's metal hide. Dr. Vaughn's mind raced as the guardians closed in. The creatures were relentless, their movements fueled by the same twisted alchemical forces that had given them life. She knew they couldn't fight them head-on, not like this. They needed a way to shut down the Darkhold's influence, or they were all doomed. "Everyone fall back to the corridor," Dr. Vaughn shouted as the Spartan unit fell into formation, firing on the guardians as they retreated. But just as they were about to exit the chamber, the ground began to crack open, and a massive form rose. From the center of the altar, a creature that dwarfed the others, its body a massive amalgamation of flesh, bone, and metal. It was the true creation of the Darkhold, the ultimate hybrid. "This is it," Dr. Vaughn whispered, her heart sinking. "This is what they were building, and it's awake." Chapter 4. The Final Experiment. The massive hybrid creature loomed over them, its form a grotesque combination of organic flesh and intricate cybernetic enhancements. Towering at least 25 feet tall, it was a monstrous amalgamation of bone, muscle, and twisted machinery, the gleaming metal plating on its body shimmering under the eerie lights of the chamber. Its face, if it could even be called a face, was a horrific patchwork of human and animal features, with glowing yellow eyes that burned with a sentient malice. Dr. Vaughn's heart pounded in her chest as the beast's eyes locked onto her. She could feel the weight of its gaze, a cold, calculating intelligence behind those eyes. This was no mere beast. This was the culmination of the alchemic codex's forbidden knowledge, the final experiment, the ultimate hybrid. Fall back. Sergeant, Thorpe barked, his voice a grim command. The Spartan unit opened fire, but their bullets did little more than cause sparks to fly from the creature's metal plating. It didn't flinch. It didn't even seem to notice. Dr. Vaughn's mind raced. She knew they couldn't fight it head-on. The creature was too powerful, too evolved. They needed to disable it, to disconnect it from the alchemical and cybernetic forces that had brought it to life. But how? As if reading her mind, the creature let out an unholy roar, a sound that rattled the very bones of the chamber. It swung one of its massive cybernetic arms, sending a blast of energy through the air. The shockwave sent the team scattering, throwing them off their feet and tumbling across the stone floor. "Get up! We need a plan!" Sergeant Thorpe shouted as he scrambled to his feet, his armor scorched and dented from the blast. Dr. Vaughn's thoughts turned to the orb, the source of the Darkhold's power. Kane's failed attempt to interface with it had triggered this monstrosity's awakening, but perhaps there was still a way to control or shut it down. If they could get to the orb again, they might be able to sever the link between the creature and the Darkhold's influence. "I have an idea," Dr. Vaughn shouted over the din of battle, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Kane, we need to access the orb again. We can't fight it physically, but we can hack the alchemical network that powers it." "Kane." Ito's eyes widened as he realized what she meant. "You want me to connect to that thing again? After everything that happened?" "We don't have a choice," Dr. Vaughn said urgently, grabbing his arm. "We need to disconnect the Darkhold's power from this monstrosity. If we don't, it will keep evolving, keep growing stronger. We'll never survive." Kane hesitated for a split second before nodding grimly. He turned and began sprinting toward the altar, his cybernetic interface already whirring to life. The creature roared again, its glowing eyes locking onto the two of them, its massive body surging forward with terrifying speed. "Cover them!" Sergeant Thorpe shouted, his voice filled with raw determination. The Spartan unit opened fire once more, their weapons pouring a hail of bullets into the creature's armored hide. It barely slowed down, but it bought Kane and Io. Dr. Vaughn a precious few moments. Dr. Vaughn could feel the heat of the creature's gaze on her back, its presence like a crushing weight. They were running out of time. The orb was pulsing in the center of the chamber, its strange energy crackling and humming as Kane approached. "Hurry!" Dr. Vaughn urged, her voice strained as the creature reached the perimeter the Spartans had set up. They couldn't hold it back for much longer. Kane reached the orb and began plugging his cybernetic interface into the tendrils surrounding it. The orb responded with a violent pulse of energy, and for a moment, everything in the room seemed to freeze. "Stay with me," Dr. Vaughn muttered to herself, her eyes never leaving the creature. It was almost upon them now, its massive spiked fists swinging in their direction. She couldn't let them die here. Not now. The ground shook as the creature launched itself at them, its weight causing cracks to form in the floor beneath its feet. Dr. Vaughn's heart pounded in her chest, but she forced herself to stay focused. Kane's work was their only hope. Then, just as the creature's claws were about to strike, a brilliant light erupted from the orb. The creature froze mid-motion, its body twitching as if struggling to resist the surge of power. "Got it!" Kane shouted, his voice triumphant as the orb's light intensified. "I've isolated the alchemical signal. Disconnecting now!" The entire chamber seemed to shake as the orb pulsed one last time, and the creature let out a horrible screech. Its body spasmed, its metal limbs jerking as if they were malfunctioning. It stumbled back, shaking violently as the connection between it and the Darkhold was severed. But the creature wasn't completely powerless. Not yet. With a final blood-curdling scream, the hybrid monstrosity lunged forward one last time, its arms outstretched as it sought to destroy them in a final vengeful assault. "Move!" Sergeant Thorpe shouted, diving to the side as the creature's claws swiped through the air, narrowly missing him. The Spartan unit was already retreating, regrouping behind the stone pillars for cover. Dr. Vaughn saw her opportunity. As the creature staggered, its movements erratic and confused, she sprinted toward the altar, her eyes locked on the orb. She had to do this, had to finish it before the creature regained control. Kane's cybernetic interface beeped urgently. "It's going to reset itself soon. You've got to hurry." Dr. Vaughn reached the altar, her hand reaching out to the orb once more. The alchemical power surged through her, and for a brief moment, she could feel the weight of the knowledge contained within the Darkhold. It was ancient, forbidden, and now it was hers to control. She pressed her palm to the orb. The creature let out one final deafening roar, but its body suddenly froze in midair. A blinding light consumed the chamber, and Dr. Vaughn could feel the dark alchemical energy dissipating, unraveling, as though she were pulling the very life force from the creature. Then silence. The room was still. The oppressive weight of the creature's presence was gone, and the strange humming energy of the Darkhold seemed to subside. Dr. Vaughn stood, breathing heavily, her heart racing as she looked at the lifeless form of the hybrid monstrosity. It was over, for now. Sergeant Thorpe stepped forward, his face a mix of exhaustion and relief. "You did it," he said, his voice low. Dr. Vaughn nodded slowly. "It's not over, the Codex, the Darkhold. It's still here, and it's not just one experiment. It's only the beginning. But for the moment, at least, they had survived." The island had thrown its worst at them, but Dr. Vaughn was beginning to understand its true nature. It was an evolving nightmare, yes, but she was learning how to fight it, and as long as they had breath, she would keep pushing forward. There was still much to learn, much to undo, and the mission was far from over. Chapter 5. The Rising Eclipse. The chamber was quiet save for the soft hum of the Darkhold's dormant energy and the labored breathing of the Spartan unit. The hybrid monstrosity lay motionless on the cold stone floor, its massive form now nothing, more than a broken shell, but Dr. Vaughn knew better than to assume their fight was over. The Darkhold's curse had only just begun to unravel, and the island still had many secrets left to reveal. Dr. Vaughn stood motionless in front of the altar, her hand still lightly resting on the orb, her mind racing. The last battle had been intense, but what she had just done, disrupting the hybrid creature's connection to the Darkhold, was only a temporary fix. She could feel the thrum of the island beneath her feet, as if it were alive, waiting to strike again. "Dr. Vaughn, we need to move." Sergeant Thorpe's voice broke through her thoughts, his tone firm but filled with concern. "The creature is down, but there's no telling what else is lurking down here." She turned to him, her face grim. "I know, but we've only scratched the surface. The Codex, the experiments, they're not gone. The island's ecosystem is tied to this place. This isn't just about stopping one experiment. This is a war we're fighting against the very nature of the island itself." Kane Ito, his expression drained and weary, looked up from his interface screen. "She's right. The island is still sending out pulses, synthesizing new signals. If we don't stop it, more creatures could be born from the Codex's influence. Worse, if it adapts too quickly, there won't be a way to shut it down." The weight of their situation pressed down on them like an iron vise. The storm had subsided. Above ground, but beneath them, the island was stirring, changing. The once impenetrable barriers that had kept Skull Island hidden from the outside world were beginning to fray, and whatever force lay at the heart of the Darkhold was ready to break free. "We have to go deeper," Dr. Vaughn said, a fierce resolve. Her voice. "The Codex is here, the source of everything. We need to reach the core, shut it down at its roots. If we don't, there's no telling how far the island's influence will spread." "Deep into the belly of the beast," Sergeant Thorpe muttered, his brow furrowing as he took in the gravity of their situation. "All right, we'll follow your lead, but we're running out of time." Dr. Vaughn nodded, turning toward the dark corridor ahead. The deeper they went, the more oppressive the air became. The strange alchemical energy seemed to press against them from all sides, warping the environment. As they ventured further into the island's core, the walls themselves seemed to pulse, shifting in response to their presence, as if reacting to the very essence of their being. The team moved cautiously, weapons raised, scanning the shadows for any signs of movement. The further they descended, the more bizarre the landscape became. The stone walls twisted and warped, becoming more organic in nature, veins of bioluminescent light running through them like the lifeblood of the island itself. The air grew thick with an unnatural humidity, a faint metallic tang hanging in the atmosphere. It felt less like an underground bunker and more like the inside of a living organism. Dr. Vaughn's thoughts remained on the Darkhold. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking directly into the heart of something ancient, something that had been waiting, dormant for centuries. The experiments, the hybrids, the monsters. They were all part of a greater, darker plan, and she had yet to uncover its true purpose. And then, as they rounded a corner in the narrow passageway, they saw it. A massive chamber stretched out before them, its walls lined with intricate carvings that shimmered in the dim light. At the center of the room stood a massive structure, something even larger than the altar they had just left behind. It was a fusion of organic matter and advanced technology, a grotesque monolith that seemed to pulse with the same energy as the orb. Tendrils of metal and flesh snaked out from it, twisting and coiling like roots searching for sustenance. The structure seemed to be alive, its surface rippling and shifting with unnatural movement. This is it," Dr. Vaughn whispered, her voice filled with awe and horror. "This is the core of the island's power, the final experiment." The Spartan unit stood at the ready, weapons trained on the structure, but there was an unspoken understanding among them that no amount of firepower would be able to stop what lay ahead. "Can you get close enough to interface with it?" Kane asked, his voice tight with anxiety. Dr. Vaughn swallowed hard. "I don't know. But if the Darkhold is connected to this, then this is where we end it. If we shut it down here, we can stop the mutations, stop the island's influence from spreading any further." They moved forward cautiously, stepping into the center of the chamber. The structure before them seemed to breathe, its massive form undulating as if it were some kind of living organism. Dr. Vaughn's mind was spinning, trying to make sense of everything she had learned about the Codex, the alchemical experiments, and the hybrids. But now, standing before the heart of the island, it was clear that they were facing something beyond her understanding, something more powerful than anything they had encountered before. And then, as if in response to their presence, the structure pulsed with a sudden surge of energy. A voice echoed through the chamber, ancient and rasping, as though it had been trapped within the stone for millennia. It was not a voice of a man, nor of any creature she could comprehend, but something far older. "You dare to disrupt the cycle." The walls trembled, and the very ground beneath their feet began to shift. From the depths of the chamber, shadows began to emerge, figures humanoid but deformed, their bodies a grotesque fusion of flesh and metal. They were the next generation of the Codex's creations, the true abominations, the Guardians. The voice continued, its tone filled with dark amusement. "You cannot stop the cycle. It has begun. The world will burn, and in the ashes the new order will rise. The Darkhold cannot be undone. Its power is eternal." The team braced themselves for battle, but Dr. Vaughn knew in her heart that this was no longer just a fight for survival. It was a battle for control over the very essence of life and death itself. "Shut it down," Dr. Vaughn whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. "We have to shut it down, or everything we've fought for will be lost." Kane turned to her, his expression filled with determination. "We can do this. We have to." The creature. Guardians advanced, their movements unnervingly synchronized as they encircled the team. The pulse of the chamber grew more intense, its rhythmic beat echoing through the walls like a countdown to destruction. The Darkhold's final experiment was upon them, and the fate of Skull Island of humanity hung in the balance. In Chapter 6. The Ascension of the Darkhold, The chamber seemed to shrink with every passing second, the weight of the presence in the air pressing down on the team. The Guardians, horrific creatures, their bodies twisted and corrupted by the Darkhold's influence, slowly advanced, their yellow eyes gleaming with hunger. The walls pulsed with unnatural energy, their rhythm matching the growing intensity in the air. The Darkhold's power thrummed, and the oppressive atmosphere threatened to suffocate. Dr. Vaughn's mind raced. They had been prepared for danger, but nothing could have prepared them for the overwhelming force they were facing now. These weren't just genetically altered creatures. They were living embodiments of the Darkhold's alchemical power. Each one was an anchor, an extension of the Codex's will. "Get ready," Sergeant Thorpe growled, his weapon trained on the closest Guardian, his voice barely audible over the pulsing hum. The Spartan unit formed a tight defensive perimeter around Dr. Vaughn and Kane, who stood closest to the massive, living structure at the center of the chamber. Kane's fingers danced over his interface as he tried to extract any relevant data from the structure, but the energy around them was interfering with his tech, the strange alchemical force nullifying the effectiveness of his systems. "I'm getting nothing," Kane spat, his frustration mounting. "This is unlike anything I've ever seen. The energy is blocking my connection." Dr. Vaughn's eyes were fixed on the dark, undulating mass of the monolithic structure. The shadows, cast by the Guardians, seemed to twist, as if alive, their forms distorting as they approached. Her breath hitched, but she forced herself to think clearly. She had come this far. They had to end it now. "They're not just machines," Dr. Vaughn said, her voice low but steady. "They're manifestations of the Codex. They were created to protect the heart of the Darkhold's power." The first Guardian lunged, its clawed hands swiping through the air, narrowly missing Sergeant Thorpe. The Spartan unit fired, their bullets ripping into the creature's armor, but the shots seemed to have little effect. "Fall back," Thorpe shouted. "We need to keep moving or we'll be overwhelmed." But there was no retreat. They had nowhere to run. Not with the Darkhold at the center of the chamber, its power feeding into the very walls, creating an endless cycle of nightmares. Dr. Vaughn clenched her fists. They were going to need a different approach. With a deep breath, she turned to Kane. "We need to tap into the heart of this power, directly. The Codex is an alchemical system, a conduit. If we can rewire it, reverse the energy flow, we might be able to disrupt the Guardian's control." Kane stared at her, eyes wide. "You're saying we can reprogram the Darkhold itself?" Dr. Vaughn nodded. "If we connect to the core of the island, we can sever the link. The Guardians will lose their power, the structure will crumble." "But it's going to be dangerous," Kane said, his voice tense. "It could kill us both." "I don't care," Dr. Vaughn replied with fierce resolve. "We have to end this. There's no other way." The Guardians were closing in again. One of them reached out to strike, but before it could make contact, Sergeant Thorpe and the Spartan unit moved in unison, forming a barrier of gunfire and hand-to-hand combat, keeping the creatures at bay. Dr. Vaughn and Kane rushed toward the monolithic structure at the center of the room, their hearts racing as the intense energy of the Darkhold surged around them. As they approached the structure, a terrible pressure built in the air. The shadows seemed to stretch toward them, the dark presence of the island's curse reaching out, trying to pull them in. "We're almost there," Dr. Vaughn whispered through gritted teeth. "Stay with me, Kane." Kane nodded, but his eyes were wide with fear. "Here goes nothing." He reached out and touched the surface of the structure, connecting his cybernetic interface with the living monolith. A violent pulse of energy surged through the chamber, and the walls seemed to warp around them. The Guardians howled, their bodies convulsing as the Darkhold's power was disturbed, but it was too much. Kane stumbled back, gritting his teeth. "It's overwhelming. I can't break through the encryption, it's too strong." Dr. Vaughn didn't hesitate. She stepped forward, placing both hands on the structure, her fingers brushing against the cold, organic surface. The moment she made contact, a flood of images and sensations hit her. Memories of forgotten times, arcane symbols, ancient languages, and beneath it all, the voice of the Codex, ancient and malevolent. "You cannot undo what is already done." The voice echoed in her mind, cold and filled with the weight of millennia. "You are but a fleeting interruption. The cycle will continue." Dr. Vaughn's heart pounded in her chest, but she resisted the voice, pushing through the overwhelming flood of knowledge. She focused on the core of the island, the alchemical flow that fed it, and she twisted it. She rewired the power using everything she had learned about the Codex, about hybrid evolution, and about the twisted nature of this place. And for a brief moment, the world seemed to stop. The Guardians paused, their glowing eyes flickering. The energy in the room shifted. The structure groaned as though resisting the change. But then, the pulse of the Darkhold began to falter, its rhythmic hum slowing, stuttering. "No!" The voice of the Codex screamed in her mind, its presence thrashing against her thoughts. "You cannot destroy me." But Dr. Vaughn pressed on. She reversed the flow, sending the alchemical energy into a new path, breaking the cycle that had fueled the monsters and twisted the island. The Guardians froze, their bodies stiffening as the power holding them together unraveled. The walls of the chamber shook, and the island itself seemed to groan, as though it were dying. The once thriving energy of the Darkhold began to drain, collapsing in on itself. And then, the unthinkable happened. The structure exploded with a burst of light, a final surge of energy tearing through the chamber. The Guardians' forms disintegrated in a flash, and the entire underground chamber began to collapse. The walls cracked and crumbled as the alchemical force that had powered Skull Island began to fade. "We need to go," Sergeant Thorpe shouted, his voice urgent as he grabbed Dr. Vaughn's arm. "Now!" Kane stumbled, still recovering from the energy surge, but he managed to make it to his feet. The Spartan unit led the way as they sprinted through the collapsing chamber, their footsteps echoing in the chaos. The island was dying. Dr. Vaughn looked over her shoulder one last time as the chamber began to cave in. The structure that had once powered the horrors of Skull Island was now nothing more than rubble. The Codex was no longer a threat, but the island's mysteries had left an indelible mark on her. They had survived. But what had they really uncovered? The island was silent, its secrets now buried beneath the rubble. And in the distance, above the canopy, the storm clouds that had once ravaged the world began to dissipate, as if the island's curse had finally been broken. But deep within the hollow earth, something else stirred. Chapter 7. The Shadow of What Remains. The dust still hung heavy in the air as Dr. Alexis Vaughn and the remaining members of the Spartan unit emerged from the crumbling depths of Skull Island. The once menacing storm clouds overhead had begun to dissipate, but the weight of the island's dark past lingered, a permanent scar upon the world. The vast jungle around them was eerily quiet, the constant hum of the island's twisted energy finally gone, but its lingering echoes filled the air. For a moment it seemed like the island had finally fallen silent, its nightmare-like grip loosened, perhaps forever. Yet, as they reached the extraction zone, the team's uneasy relief quickly turned to dread, a warning that they hadn't expected. The dark storm that had once enveloped the island began to surge again, this time not from the depths of Skull Island but from the horizon itself, a swirling mass of unnatural energy creeping across the ocean toward them. It wasn't the same storm as before, nor was it something natural. It was different. Do you see that? Kane Ito, his voice tinged with panic, pointed toward the sky. Dr. Vaughn looked up, squinting against the harsh light filtering through the thinning clouds. Her eyes widened. The storm was no longer a chaotic force. It had formed into something coherent. The vortex churned ominously, twisting into a dark funnel, much like the eye of a hurricane but filled with something far darker. The colors were wrong, too vibrant, a sickly green and violet, and as it spiraled, the very air seemed to hum with a sinister pulse. That shouldn't be happening, Dr. Vaughn muttered, her voice hollow with disbelief. The Codex, I severed its connection. This can't be possible. Sergeant Thorpe grabbed her by the shoulder, snapping her out of her trance. Dr. Vaughn, whatever's left of this island is still alive. We need to get the hell out of here, now. But Dr. Vaughn hesitated. She had severed the Darkhold's power, shattered the core that had given rise to the island's twisted abominations. So why was the storm forming again? And why did the sky seem to shift, like it was responding to something unseen beneath the waves? The sudden realization hit her like a physical blow. "Wait," she whispered. "This isn't just about Skull Island. Anymore, it's bigger than that. The Codex was only a fragment, only one part of a much larger network. It was never confined to the island. It was an attempt to unlock something much older." The team exchanged uneasy glances as they began to realize the magnitude of what they were facing. If the Codex had been just a piece of a much greater puzzle, then Skull Island was only the first step in a plan far beyond their understanding. "How the hell do we stop it now?" Kane asked, his voice raw with fear. Dr. Vaughn was already moving toward the extraction point. "We don't have time to figure that out. We need to reach the evac transport before that storm reaches us. If we stay here, we'll be caught in whatever that is, and that's not something we're going to survive." They moved quickly, but the sound of the storm grew louder, almost as if it were pursuing them, as if it could sense their every movement. The trees seemed to bend and sway unnaturally, the very ground beneath their boots vibrating with the pulse of energy that radiated from the swirling vortex above. The sound of a helicopter's rotor blades filled the air, cutting through the noise of the encroaching storm. The extraction team, a small group of pilots and ground crew, hovered just above the jungle canopy. The moment they touched down, the team rushed aboard, their weapons raised, eyes scanning the horizon for any signs of danger. Get in," the pilot shouted through the intercom. "We don't have much time." Dr. Vaughn was the last aboard, hesitating for just a moment before climbing into the chopper. She could feel it. Something was pulling at her, as though the island itself was trying to keep her in its grasp. She shook off the feeling, sliding into her seat and securing herself with the harness. The helicopter shot into the air, climbing rapidly above the jungle. For a moment, the team was silent, staring down at the island they had fought so hard to escape. But the island was still far from safe. The storm's eye had widened as the helicopter ascended, and the swirling vortex began to take on an unnatural, disturbing shape. It was no longer just a storm. There were shapes within it, black tendrils, swirling within the mass, far too defined, far too deliberate to be natural. Dr. Vaughn couldn't take her eyes off it. Her mind was reeling. The Codex, the forbidden knowledge, had awakened something deep beneath the surface, something far older than they had first understood. It was as if the island had been a test, a precursor to something far more dangerous. The pilot turned his head, his face tight with concern. "Doc, you're the expert. What in hell is happening down there?" Dr. Vaughn shook her head. "I don't know, but we've just unleashed something we can't stop." Before anyone could react, the storm's dark tendrils reached out, crashing into the helicopter's path, throwing it off course. The entire craft shook violently as a massive energy surge blasted across the sky, tearing through the air. The wind howled, and the helicopter was tossed like a leaf in a hurricane. "Hold on!" the pilot screamed, struggling to regain control. As the storm intensified, pushing the craft toward the twisting mass, everything went dark. When Dr. Vaughn regained consciousness, the first thing she felt was the ground beneath her, hard, uneven, cold. Her head throbbed, her body aching, but she forced herself to push through the pain. She tried to sit up, but the world spun around her. As she opened her eyes, she saw that she was no longer inside the helicopter. The jungle surrounding her was in ruins. The chopper had crashed somewhere far from the extraction point, and the storm had reached the ground, no longer a swirling vortex above, but a living, writhing thing, its tendrils spreading across the landscape like the roots of a malignant tree. "Dr. Vaughn," Kane's voice cut through the haze, and she looked up to see him, injured but alive, standing just a few feet away. The Spartan unit was scattered around the wreckage, gathering their bearings. "What happened?" she asked, her voice weak. "We were hit by a blast," Kane explained, his voice filled with urgency. "We didn't crash far from the site, but it looks like the storm wants us here. The energy's coming from below ground. It's like the island itself is shifting, as if it's changing again. The air was thick, the ground trembling under awe. Their feet. Dr. Vaughn turned, her eyes narrowing as she saw the unnatural distortion in the sky and the land. She felt it now, a dark pulse that radiated from the depths of the earth. Something ancient, something far worse than the Codex. This isn't just an island anymore, Dr. Vaughn whispered, her heart sinking. This is the beginning of something else, a new cycle. And it's not just here. It's spreading. We've unleashed the Darkhold's full potential. The ground. Beneath them rumbled, and a low, guttural sound filled the air. They had awakened something far beyond their understanding, and now they had to face it. Chapter 8. The core of the darkness. The air felt thick with dread as Dr. Vaughn and the team navigated through the wreckage of the helicopter. The landscape around them was unrecognizable. What had once been a lush, dense jungle was now a nightmare, a twisted fusion of organic matter and unnatural energy. The ground beneath their feet pulsed, and dark veins of energy coursed through the earth, spreading outward like the roots of an ancient, malevolent tree. "We need to move," Sergeant Thorpe barked, snapping Dr. Vaughn from her thoughts. He scanned the area, his sharp eyes narrowing. "The storm's not the only problem. Something else is waking up down here." Kane, who had been checking his weapons and recalibrating his cybernetic interface, looked up at the horizon. The sky was still distorted, swirling with violet and green hues. The storm had sunk deeper into the land, but now it was alive, a sentient force that seemed to be drawing energy from the very core of the island. The trees twisted unnaturally, some leaning toward the sky as if trying to escape the suffocating grip of the ground, while others seemed to wither and die in mere moments. "This isn't just a storm," Kane said, his voice tight. "It's a manifestation of whatever's beneath us, and it's not just pulling power from the island. It's feeding off of us." Dr. Vaughn glanced over at him, her face pale. "It's not the island," she whispered. "It's the island's curse. The Darkhold's influence has spread far beyond the core. The Codex was just a fraction of the whole. Whatever we've unleashed, it's ancient. It's part of something much older, something more primal." "We don't have time to analyze it," Sergeant Thorpe interrupted. "We need to find a way to stop it." The pulse beneath their feet intensified, sending ripples through the ground. Dr. Vaughn could feel it now, like a heartbeat, deep in the earth, echoing beneath the surface. The island itself seemed to be alive, drawing strength from the storm, and whatever arcane forces were at play. Every step they took felt like it was pushing them deeper into the heart of the island's darkness. The team pushed forward, staying close as they weaved their way through the unnaturally shifting landscape. The foliage seemed to recoil as they passed, the twisted trees and vines hissing like serpents, their bark cracked and charred. The air was thick with a pungent metallic scent, like blood and rust. The jungle had become a place of rot and corruption, and the deeper they went, the more they felt the pressure building. They were nearing something, a source, a core. As they reached a clearing, the ground cracked open, revealing a massive chasm in the earth. The crevasse stretched out before them, impossibly wide, and from its depths, an infernal light pulsed. The air shimmered with heat and a dark, palpable energy, as if the ground itself was alive, breathing. "We're close," Dr. Vaughn whispered, her voice barely audible. She felt it too, the same presence, the same pulse that had been reverberating throughout the island, but now it was stronger, more focused. This was it, the source. At the center of the chasm, a towering structure rose from the earth, its surface covered in strange, glowing runes, symbols that seemed to move and shift in response to their presence. It was a black spire, jagged and uneven, pulsing with an otherworldly energy. The structure wasn't entirely made of stone. It was a fusion of something ancient, living, and mechanical. It was as if the island's very soul had been carved into this monolith, and now it had awakened. "It's alive," Kane muttered, his voice filled with awe and terror. "That's the Darkhold's heart," Dr. Vaughn said, her heart pounding in her chest. That's the source of the storm. That's where it all began. The ground around the chasm trembled, and the sky above seemed to grow darker, the energy in the air intensifying. The storm was no longer a distant threat. It was here, and it was moving toward them with terrifying speed. "They're coming," Sergeant Thorpe said, his voice low. "We've got to get to that spire, now." Without another word, the team began to move toward the chasm, the roar of the storm growing louder with each passing second. The Guardians, the creatures they had fought earlier, began to emerge from the jungle, twisted abominations that were, once human, now reshaped by the power of the Codex. They were the sentinels of the island, the last line of defense against anyone who dared to approach the core. "We don't have much time," Dr. Vaughn said, taking a deep breath. She had to act. "Firsty, the storm's only a symptom. The real threat is whatever lies in the spire. If we don't stop it, the island will continue to feed on everything around it. Everything in its path. We have to destroy the spire's core." As they neared the chasm, the ground beneath them shook violently, sending the team sprawling to the earth. From the depths of the fissure, a massive creature began to emerge, part organic, part machine, a behemoth that seemed to have been born from the very heart of the island's curse. Its body was a grotesque fusion of bone, metal, and sinew, its eyes glowing with a sickly light. It was a monstrosity, an abomination that had been forged in the darkness of the Darkhold's power. The creature let out a deafening roar as it began to climb toward them, its massive claws tearing into the earth, leaving deep gouges in the ground. It was the island's final guardian, its last line of defense, and it was closing in on them fast. "Fall back!" Sergeant Thorpe shouted. "Get to the spire! We can't fight this thing!" The team scrambled to their feet, rushing toward the chasm and the spire. But the creature was closing the distance quickly, its massive form barreling toward them. Its presence alone seemed to warp the very air, distorting reality as it moved. "Dr. Vaughn, you need to disrupt it," Kane shouted, his voice filled with desperation. "We need to stop the core." Dr. Vaughn didn't hesitate. The time had come. She knew what had to be done. She had to sever the island's hold once and for all. With her heart racing, she sprinted ahead, heading straight for the spire at the center of the chasm. The creature roared, but it was too late. She was already at the base of the structure, her fingers brushing against the black surface of the spire. She could feel the dark energy flowing through it, cold, ancient, and all-encompassing. Her mind raced as she tapped into everything she had learned about hybrid evolution, cybernetic engineering, and alchemy. She had no time to think. She had to act. Her hands moved quickly, pressing against the structure's surface, and with a final desperate push, she released a surge of energy into the spire. The runes began to flare, glowing with a blinding intensity, as the island itself seemed to react violently to her interference. The ground beneath them cracked open, and the sky exploded with energy as the storm above roared to life, swirling with a violent intensity. Dr. Vaughn's eyes widened as the spire began to implode, its energy destabilizing. But it wasn't just the spire that was collapsing. The entire island seemed to be unraveling, as if the very fabric of reality itself was being torn apart. She turned to the team, who were standing at the edge of the chasm, watching in horror as the spire crumbled. "We need to get out of here," Dr. Vaughn shouted, her voice barely audible over the explosion of energy. "Now!" But the storm was already upon them, and it was too late. Chapter 9. The final descent. The world seemed to collapse around them. Dr. Vaughn's heart raced as the spire disintegrated, sending a shockwave through the ground that knocked her off her feet. The air shimmered with the last remnants of the Darkhold's dark energy as the chasm began to widen, the earth itself splitting open in jagged rifts. The sky above them, once a tumultuous storm, was now alive with unnatural color, swirling greens and purples that twisted like sentient tendrils of energy, reaching toward the wreckage of the spire. "Move now," Sergeant Thorpe shouted, his voice barely cutting through the roar of the collapsing island. The ground beneath their feet rumbled violently, as if the island itself was screaming in agony. The ancient heart of Skull Island was dying, and everything in its path was going with it. Kane Ito was already moving, his enhanced cybernetic limbs allowing him to push through the violent tremors with greater speed. His eyes darted toward Dr. Vaughn, his face a mask of urgency and determination. "This place is falling apart. We need to make it to the evac point, or we'll be buried under the wreckage." Dr. Vaughn snapped out of her daze, the gravity of the situation crashing down on her. The spire was crumbling faster than she had anticipated, its blackened structure dissolving into a cascade of fractured energy that ignited the air around them. The storm was feeding on the destruction, spiraling tighter and more erratic as the island's defenses reached their final cataclysmic phase. "We don't have much time," Dr. Vaughn shouted, shaking her head as she sprinted toward the extraction point. Behind them, the abomination, the massive hybrid creature that had guarded. The spire was now charging toward them with terrifying speed. Its enormous claws dug into the earth, sending plumes of dirt and stone flying into the air, its roar shaking the very air around them. The beast was a horrific fusion of ancient biology and arcane engineering, its body distorting and shifting with every step it took, as though the island's energy was altering it further with each passing moment. "We can't outrun it," Sergeant Thorpe yelled, his rifle raised. But he knew it was useless. There was no stopping the creature now. The storm above was guiding it, controlling it, making it an unstoppable force of nature. Dr. Vaughn's mind raced. They had no choice. The only way out was through. She had to get them to the evac zone. The helicopter, the only way off this hellish island, was their only hope. She grabbed Kane by the arm, pulling him along as she pushed forward through the chaos. "We can't fight it. We need to keep moving. Focus on survival." Ahead, the jungle was a war zone. The storm had altered everything. The trees were no longer rooted to the ground. They swayed violently, their trunks splitting and twisting as if alive. The very air pulsed with energy, and every step they took seemed to be met with a violent tremor or a burst of light from the storm above. But there was no turning back. They couldn't afford to hesitate. The roar of the abomination grew louder as it barreled through the wreckage, the ground quaking beneath them. They had to keep moving or they wouldn't make it. Finally, they saw the evac point, a small open area where the chopper had originally set down. The ground was cracked and shifting, but it was their only chance. "Almost there," Sergeant Thorpe grunted, his eyes scanning the jungle as he fired a few shots in the direction of the beast, hoping to slow it down. It was futile, but it bought them precious seconds. The helicopter was still waiting, hovering low above the ground, its engines roaring to life in preparation for takeoff. The crew inside was frantically waving them forward, their faces pale with fear. But just as they reached the clearing, the ground shook violently again. The abomination was on them. In a last-ditch effort to stop them from escaping, it let out a deafening roar, its massive claws swiping through the air toward Dr. Vaughn and the others. "Get in now," the pilot shouted, his voice almost drowned out by the beast's roar. Dr. Vaughn pushed forward, her legs burning, her heart racing, but she could feel the beast's breath behind them, hot, rancid air that stank of rot and death. Kane was the first aboard the helicopter, his cybernetic limbs helping him clear the distance with speed. Sergeant Thorpe was next, followed by the rest of the team. But just as Dr. Vaughn was about to climb aboard, she heard a guttural scream. It was too late. The creature had reached them. With a brutal swipe, its claws tore through the air, grazing the edge of the helicopter's tail rotor. Sparks flew, and the helicopter lurched violently, threatening to spin out of control. "Hang on!" the pilot screamed, fighting with the controls as the helicopter began to ascend. But the damage was done. The storm had become a living, twisting nightmare, and the creature wasn't going to let them leave that easily. The helicopter jerked to the side as the beast's claws slashed through the air again, catching the chopper's tail and sending it into a violent spin. Dr. Vaughn could feel the ground dropping away beneath them as the storm whipped around them, its energy crackling through the very hull of the helicopter. Pull up, the pilot screamed. Dr. Vaughn reached for the nearest support bar, her mind spinning as they began their ascent, but it wasn't enough. The storm above them, the creature below them, it was all coming to a head. They were being pulled back, into the island's grasp, a final attempt by the curse to drag them down into the depths. Then, there was a sudden jolt, a violent shockwave from the storm. The chopper rocked violently, then suddenly, there was nothing. A moment of silence, and then a deafening explosion. Dr. Vaughn's world went black. When she opened her eyes again, the first thing she noticed was the complete absence of sound. It was as if the world had been swallowed by an endless void. She tried to move but found her body unable to respond. Pain rippled through her head, her limbs heavy as if weighed down by something far worse than exhaustion. She could hear her breath ragged in her ears, but other than that, the world was eerily still. The only thing she could see was a bright light in the distance, faint, flickering, as though it were struggling to stay alight. Slowly, her vision began to clear, and she realized with a chill that she was no longer in the helicopter. The storm was gone, but so was the island. The jungle, the crumbling spire, the creature, they were all gone. She was alone in a place that defied understanding. It wasn't Earth. It wasn't any place she had ever known. The storm had not just been a force of nature, it had been a gateway, and whatever had been unleashed on Skull Island was just the beginning. Chapter 10. The edge of reality. Dr. Vaughn's vision gradually focused as she lay on the cold, smooth surface, her body aching from the ordeal. She pushed herself upright, her hands shaking as she gripped the strange, glowing surface beneath her. The light surrounding her seemed to hum with an unsettling energy, and the air was thick with a kind of electric charge. It was as if the world itself was breathing in and out, a steady rhythm she could feel deep in her chest. The last thing she remembered was the chopper spiraling out of control, the beast's claws scraping against its hull. Had they made it out? Was she the only one left? The thought made her stomach churn, but there was no time for despair. She had to figure out where she was, how to get back, and, if there was any hope, how to stop the curse that had ravaged Skull Island. But none of that made sense in the world she was in now. She stood up slowly, testing her balance. The light shifted in waves around her, revealing a horizon that didn't look like any landscape she had ever seen. The ground was a strange, shimmering material, almost liquid, yet solid underfoot. The sky was alive with swirling constellations, planets and stars that seemed to pulse and shift as if the entire universe was in motion. Dr. Vaughn glanced around, searching for anything that might give her a clue. There were no structures, no landmarks, just the endless expanse of this eerie landscape. But then, far in the distance, she saw something. A shape, large, imposing, and dark. It was standing against the backdrop of the swirling cosmos like a silhouette carved from the void itself. Her instincts told her to approach cautiously, but there was no other direction to go. She began walking, her pace quickening as she moved toward the shape. Each step seemed to echo unnaturally in the silence. As she got closer, the shape revealed itself to be something that both terrified and intrigued her. A colossal figure, unlike anything human, standing still as if waiting for her. It was neither entirely mechanical nor entirely organic. It was both. A towering figure made from metal and bone, its face obscured by a hooded cloak that seemed to flicker with the same energy as the surrounding light. Her heart pounded as she stopped in front of the figure. It didn't move, but she could feel its gaze, piercing and ancient, as if it had been watching her for eternity. "Who are you?" Dr. Vaughn's voice was barely a whisper, but it cut through the stillness, as if the universe itself was listening. The figure did not respond at first, but then the air around it shimmered. Words appeared in the space between them, glowing with the same unnatural light. "I am the keeper of the threshold." Dr. Vaughn's breath caught in her throat. This was no ordinary being. She had heard whispers of entities like this in her studies, but nothing quite like what she was seeing. "What is this place?" she asked, her voice trembling now. "Where am I?" "You are at the border between realms, the place where the Darkhold's power was meant to lead. A nexus. The Darkhold." Her mind reeled as the pieces clicked together. This is where it all started. This is what the Codex intended. The storm. The curse? It's all connected to this place, isn't it? Yes, the Keeper replied. You have unraveled the threads of fate. The storm was but a part of the plan, the conduit to open the gateway. Now you stand at the point of no return. A chill ran down Dr. Vaughn's spine as she tried to process everything. What does that mean, the point of no return? The Keeper's hooded figure began to shift, and the space around her seemed to bend and twist, as if reality itself was uncoiling. The island, the creatures, the experiments, they were the beginning, but the true objective was not the island itself. The true objective was to awaken what lies beyond. Dr. Vaughn took a step back, her mind racing. You mean, the island was a key? A key to something else? The Codex never sought to conquer Earth, only to open the door. The storm was a herald of the coming darkness. The creatures, the hybrid experiments, they were but harbingers. You have crossed into the space between worlds, where the entities that shaped the island now lie dormant. The power you unleashed on Skull Island, it was only the first ripple. No, Dr. Vaughn whispered. The Codex, the experiments, the curse, it was all meant to bring this here. The Keeper's voice deepened, resonating through the very air. Not just here. This place has no bounds. The threshold you crossed, it leads into the depths of the multiverse. The storm was only the beginning of the cascade. Dr. Vaughn took a deep breath. Her mind whirled with the implications. This wasn't just a fight for survival anymore. This wasn't just about the island's horrors, or the monsters. This was a cosmic battle, an opening of the very fabric of existence. The experiments, the twisted creatures, they were all a part of a much larger, more terrifying plan. A plan that had been set into motion long before she had ever stepped foot on Skull Island. And the storm had only been the first step. I can stop this, she said, more to herself than to the Keeper. I have to stop this. The Keeper's silhouette flickered once more. You cannot undo what has been set in motion, Dr. Vaughn. The only question that remains is whether you will be the one to ensure it comes to fruition, or whether you will perish trying to halt it. Dr. Vaughn stood her ground, the weight of the revelation settling on her shoulders. The storm, the experiments, the creatures, they were nothing compared to what lay beyond. The fate of not just Skull Island, but all worlds rested in her hands. The Codex had been a key. The Darkhold had been a map, and she had opened the door. The Keeper's figure faded into the surrounding light, leaving Dr. Vaughn standing at the edge of a vast and infinite abyss. Chapter 11. The Final Choice. The silence was deafening. Dr. Vaughn stared into the void, her breath quickening. The Keeper's cryptic words echoed in her mind. She had opened the door, a door to something far more terrifying than the horrors of Skull Island. And now she had to face the consequences. She looked back toward the horizon, where the stars flickered ominously. There was no going back. The island's destruction had only been the beginning of the chain reaction. The universe itself had been destabilized, and if she didn't act, reality itself could collapse. But what could she possibly do against an entity that had existed for eons? Something far beyond human comprehension? A strange resolve settled over her. She had always been driven by her desire to understand, to solve the mysteries of biology, evolution, and the very fabric of life. But this was something beyond science. This was something primal, ancient. And if she was to stop it, she had to become something more. She had to push the boundaries of what she knew, and perhaps even sacrifice everything she had ever known. With a deep breath, she turned her back on the abyss and began to walk toward the edge of the unknown. The Keeper had said it herself. There was no going back. But maybe, just maybe, there was a way to rewrite the ending. Dr. Alexis Vaughn had survived the horrors of Skull Island. But in the end, it would be her mind, her will, and her spirit that would determine whether she could prevent the collapse of the multiverse itself. Her journey had only just begun. Chapter 12. The Gateway of Fates. The ground beneath Dr. Vaughn's feet began to hum with an ethereal pulse, an energy that felt both alien and familiar at once. She kept walking, driven by a single thought. Stop it. Whatever it is, stop it. She didn't know where this road would lead, nor did she care. There was no turning back now. The Keeper's words still echoed in her mind, a constant reminder that the storm, the creatures, and everything she had experienced on Skull Island were just the beginning of something much greater. Ahead, she could see it, the gateway, a towering structure formed from a translucent, shimmering substance. It looked like nothing Dr. Vaughn had ever encountered in her scientific career, an organic and mechanical fusion that seemed to hum with unnatural power, swirling with energies that defied her understanding of physics. As she drew closer, the air seemed to vibrate. The stars above seemed to bend and twist, forming constellations that pulsated in rhythm with her heartbeat. She had crossed into a place where time, space, and reality were malleable. The Nexus. The Keeper had told her this was the boundary between all worlds, a point of convergence for countless realities, dimensions, and possibilities. The structure before her loomed, its towering form dark and imposing. It wasn't just a doorway. It was the key to the multiverse, the point where all paths intersected. And if the Codex was right, if the Darkhold's power could truly twist the fabric of life, it was here that the next phase of the experiments would unfold. For a moment, Dr. Vaughn stopped. She could feel the weight of what was about to happen, what had already begun. Her mind, racing for answers, stumbled across the impossible. The truth that the Codex, through its twisted alchemy and dark sorcery, had been preparing for this moment for decades. It had wanted to tear open the veil between dimensions, not just for the sake of control over Earth, but to shape a new order, an order of monsters, of gods, of nightmares. This was the culmination of centuries of forbidden knowledge. The storm, the creatures, they had all been stepping stones leading to this very moment. She looked down at her hands, the same hands that had touched the Darkhold and sought to understand the impossible. But the more she uncovered, the more she realized she was too close to the edge now. The hybrid creatures, the monstrous experiments, those were just the physical manifestations of the Darkhold's influence. But this was the origin. The gateway itself pulsed, and a strange sensation washed over her. It was as if the very essence of the place was reaching out to her, calling her forward, as if she were being beckoned, not by some malevolent force, but by something more ancient and powerful, something that had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations across realities. A sudden crash of sound split the silence. The air itself seemed to fracture as something heavy landed behind her. Dr. Vaughn spun around, her pulse racing. Emerging from the darkened mists of the surrounding void, a figure approached, one she never expected to see again. It was Kane Ito. "Dr. Vaughn," Kane said, his voice strained. His cybernetic eyes glowed faintly, casting an eerie light across his face. His body seemed even more altered now, his limbs bristling with mechanical augmentations that pulsed with strange energy. He had been altered by the storm, by the experiments. She gasped. "Kane, what happened to you? How are you?" "I didn't make it out of the crash," Kane interrupted, his voice low and tinged with a darkness she couldn't quite place. "But I wasn't meant to leave, was I?" His gaze flickered to the gateway. "The Keeper called me, just like it called you." Dr. Vaughn felt a pang of disbelief. No, Kane. The storm, the Codex, the Darkhold, it was never meant for you. You were supposed to be a survivor, not a part of this." Kane stepped closer, his movements unnaturally fluid, his eyes locked onto her. "The truth is, Alexis," he said slowly, "I never survived the crash. What you're seeing here, it's not me anymore. I'm something else, something beyond human. I've been chosen." Dr. Vaughn's breath caught. Chosen by what? "The gateway," Kane said, his voice almost hypnotic now. "It doesn't just open worlds, it opens us, it changes us, it gives us power. I've seen it, Alexis. The worlds on the other side, realities where the Darkhold's influence is absolute, where we could rule, where we could shape the future of the multiverse. He was no longer the man she had known. This thing, this creature standing before her, was an entirely different being. The keeper had told her this place had the power to reshape everything, and it was clear now that the storm had not just affected the island. It had affected them all. Dr. Vaughn's mind raced. She had to act quickly. The gateway was pulling Kane into its grasp, and he had already succumbed to its influence. He was becoming part of it. The fate of every reality, every dimension now hinged on whether or not she could stop him from crossing through. "Kane, you have to stop. This isn't you." She took a step toward him, but her voice cracked with uncertainty. Could he hear her? Or was it already too late? "I can't stop now," Kane replied, his voice tinged with an unnatural calmness. "It's already too late for me. But you have a choice. Come with me. We can change everything. We can be gods." "No," Dr. Vaughn said firmly, shaking her head. "This ends now." Without warning, she activated the last of the explosives she had salvaged from the wreckage of the helicopter. They were designed to be a last resort, a fail-safe in case something went horribly wrong. But she had always hoped she wouldn't need to use them. She pressed the button. A sudden burst of energy erupted from the explosive, ripping through the air and slamming into the gateway. The entire structure trembled, the fabric of reality around them warping and cracking. Kane let out a scream as the shockwave hit him, his body convulsing. His once human form now a twisted amalgamation of flesh and metal. "No!" Dr. Vaughn shouted, her voice breaking as she watched Kane's transformation accelerate. His body began to disintegrate, torn apart by the forces of the gateway's unstable energy. But it wasn't just his body. It was his very essence, his soul, being consumed by the storm. The gateway was collapsing, the very fabric of space beginning to unravel. The explosion had set off a chain reaction, destabilizing the portal and its connection to the multiverse. With one final, tortured cry, Kane disappeared into the void, his form disintegrating completely, leaving only a ripple in the air. Dr. Vaughn staggered back, breathless. The storm, the gateway, it was all collapsing, the rift was closing. The multiverse was safe. For now. But the price had been high. She turned away from the ruins of the gateway, knowing that the world she once knew, no, the worlds, would never be the same. And as she walked away from the destruction, the final truth settled in her mind. The woe island was just the beginning, and the real war, it had only just begun. Epilogue. The price of knowledge. The world had not been kind to Dr. Alexis Vaughn since her return from Skull Island. In fact, it had been downright unforgiving. The headlines were filled with strange reports, mysterious storms that seemed to swirl. At the edges of the Pacific, unexplained power outages that lasted days, and unverified sightings of colossal creatures moving through the deep ocean. The island itself? Gone. Erased from the map. Its very location now buried beneath an endless sea, a silent testament to the disaster that had unfolded. Dr. Vaughn had been debriefed endlessly, questioned by every agency and government faction imaginable. They wanted answers, explanations. What had happened on Skull Island? How had the storm started? What had she seen? What really happened to Kane Ito? But there were no answers she could give. Not the truth, at least. She couldn't explain how the very fabric of reality had bent and twisted before her, how she had seen glimpses of the multiverse, worlds where civilizations were ruled by monstrous, godlike beings. She couldn't explain how she had watched her closest friend and ally disintegrate into nothing, consumed by the very power they had unwittingly unleashed. The truth would never be told. Not because she didn't want to, but because no one would believe it. She was left with only the weight of what had transpired, and the haunting knowledge that the island's curse, though gone, was not truly finished. She had shut down the gateway, but it had never been the only one. There were others, hidden, dormant, waiting for someone else, something else to awaken them. Alexis Vaughn sat alone in her small, dimly lit apartment, the city's distant hum a faint reminder of normalcy. Her hands, once steady and confident, now trembled as she stared at the remnants of the Darkhold. The ancient tome lay on the table before her, its dark pages still pulsing with a strange energy, as if alive. She had thought she'd destroyed the key to everything, but like the island itself, the Darkhold had a way of surviving, of waiting. She closed her eyes, shutting out the memories of what she had seen in the Nexus, the swirling constellations, the horrors beyond the gateway, and the whispering voices that still haunted her dreams. She had seen the future. She knew that the world was not safe, not by a long shot, but she also knew this: she was not done. She would never be done. The experiments on Skull Island, the horrors she had faced, they were just a glimpse of what lay beneath the surface. The Codex, the Keeper, the Gateway. They were all connected to something greater, something older. And somewhere, out there, beyond the reach of human understanding, the storm still lingered. Dr. Vaughn opened her eyes and picked up the Darkhold once more. Its pages shifted, its cryptic symbols seeming to call to her. She would find the other gateways. She would seek out the Codex's remnants. And perhaps most importantly, she would make sure no one ever came close to understanding the true power of the Darkhold again. The storm had passed, but the war, her war, had only just begun. The end, for now. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed the story. Let me know in the comments what ideas you would like the next story to be about. Please leave a thumbs up, share, subscribe, comment.